Imagine a woman, let's call her Sarah, scrolling through her phone at a cafe. Her screen is a blur of vibrant notifications, dozens of new likes, flirty DMs, another match with a guy who looks like a fitness model. To anyone watching, she radiates this, quiet confidence of someone who knows she's in high demand. And in this moment, she absolutely is. The digital marketplace has spoken, and the bids for her attention are just pouring in. But what's really fascinating is what happens next inside her mind. She doesn't see this as just fun or validation. She sees it as hard data, a concrete market report. It tells her, with what feels like mathematical certainty, that she is an 8, maybe even a 9. So when a perfectly decent, stable man, a solid 7 by any objective measure, asks her out, her reaction isn't just disinterest. It's genuine, rational confusion. Why would she, an 8.5, ever settle for a 7? The market has clearly shown her she can do better, but here's the brutal twist she can't see coming. That bustling, thriving marketplace she trusts so completely, it's running on fake currency. And the moment she tries to cash in those digital chips for something real, for a lasting commitment from one of those high-value bidders, the entire illusion is going to shatter. That opening scenario, it feels so specific to right now, doesn't it? And it perfectly sets the stage for our deep dive today. Our mission is really to investigate these socio-psychological mechanisms behind this whole phenomenon, this inflated self-perceived mate value, and these increasingly unrealistic expectations that are just being fueled by all this digital validation.
And it's so important that we approach this not just as, a cultural trend, but as a real conflict between different ways of analyzing the world. We're trying to figure out if it's even effective, analytically, to frame human mating as this microeconomic market, complete with value, supply, and demand.
And then you have to contrast that with the messy reality of how people actually think and feel.
Exactly, and how these ideas get interpreted or misinterpreted online.
It really is like the math of attraction, but It feels like we've been given 3 wildly different calculators from 3 different professors, and we have to figure out which one is actually measuring something real.
That's the core challenge, and it's basically how we've structured this whole discussion. We're going to contrast 3 specific ways of looking at this problem. First, we'll get into the personal internal stuff, the psychology,
right,
the nature of self-presentation and social comparison, just to understand why that digital currency feels so powerful and so inflated.
That's the why behind Sarah's confidence boost, but I'm guessing it's also the why behind a lot of anxiety.
It is. Then second, we're going to pivot pretty sharply to the external mathematical structure, the hard economics of marriage markets. So we'll look at the established theories of, long-term partner value, complementarity, utility maximization, all defined by scarcity and specialization.
And then the third piece.
And then third, we have to wade into the vast and often really antagonistic divergence between serious academic evolutionary psychology and its much more polarizing, sometimes weaponized online interpretation.
That's where things get really intense.
It is. It lets us see how scientific concepts get co-opted and, frankly, misused in these online ideological spaces, which then creates enormous psychological pressure on everyone involved.
So the first step, as we saw with Sarah, is just acknowledging that the environment itself, this constant, curated, appearance-driven stream of social media, it creates a fundamentally artificial playing field.
It's a stage.
Exactly, a stage where everyone is putting on their best, most expensive outfit. And that instantly distorts the perception of scarcity, of demand, and, critically, of your own standing. This is where that fake currency comes from.
You really can't understand the modern relationship climate and all the frustration that comes with it without first dissecting the psychological feedback loop that generates this very unstable perceived self-worth.
Okay, let's do that. Let's unpack this deep psychological feedback loop. It seems like it all starts with the effort we put into that digital persona, right?
Yeah.
With a concept called false self-presentation, or FSP.
That's the starting point. And it's so much deeper than just, using a good filter on a photo.
Right.
It's the conscious crafting of an idealized, or in some cases, a fundamentally inauthentic online persona.
So what does that include?
It includes the heavily edited photos, sure, but also narratives that just completely omit any struggle and only feature these glamorous aspirational moments. Or sharing things that strategically hide what you actually believe or feel. It's a performance.
A performance designed to get a specific reaction.
A specific positive social response. Absolutely.
So what's the internal cost of keeping that performance up? I know there's a framework for this, self-discrepancy theory.
That's the one. That theory really helps analyze the gaps between 3 critical versions of the self. First, there's the actual self. That's who you are right now, flaws and all.
Okay.
Then there's the ideal self, who you aspire to be. your highlights, your achievements, your goals. And finally, the ought self. That's who you feel you're supposed to be, based on all these societal expectations and what your peers are doing.
And the digital world doesn't just allow for that gap between the versions of yourself. It actively encourages it. It amplifies it.
It absolutely does. When Sarah's posting only her trips, her most flattering selfies, and stories of success, she's posting her ideal self.
And that creates a huge psychological gap with her actual self the moment she logs off.
And because social media is so public, or feels so public, it just cranks up the pressure related to the ought self. Users feel this intense pressure to conform to whatever the expected standard is, whether it's physical perfection or overnight financial success or, having this amazing social life.
It's like a public scorecard that's constantly being updated.
It is.
So FSP is the tool you use to build this ideal self, but what keeps the whole fragile thing from just collapsing, that brings us to what you called the mediating mechanism. This fear of negative evaluation, or FNE.
Yes. FSP significantly heightens FNE. This is the chronic anxiety, the worry, the distress of being judged or criticized or exposed as a phony for not meeting those idealized standards you've projected.
So when you've invested all this time and energy into curating an image of yourself as an 8.5, the fear that someone's going to see the actual 6 underneath must be immense.
It can be debilitating.
And this is where it shifts from just a performance to a real compulsion. You might think that the people with the highest FSP, the fakers, are just the most active users, but the research shows something different. FSP doesn't directly cause excessive social media use.
That's the really unexpected finding. The connection is indirect. And FNE is that crucial middleman. The excessive engagement isn't just pure narcissism.
What is it then?
It's a form of anxiety management. Users engage excessively with these platforms in order to manage the anxiety of FNE.
Wait, so they post the perfect image, which creates anxiety that the image isn't real, and then they compulsively check and recheck for likes and comments to reassure themselves that the performance is still working.
Precisely. They are constantly checking their scores, monitoring reactions, maybe deleting posts that don't do well, or continuously tweaking their presentation to fit what they think people expect.
And that's all driven by this need for immediate reassurance.
Continuous reassurance and approval, just to mitigate that psychological discomfort that the self-discrepancy created in the first place. It is a highly stressful, self-reinforcing loop of performance and paranoia.
So the excessive use isn't just about showing off. It's about soothing this anxious need for constant verification that you haven't been rejected yet.
That's it, exactly.
That makes perfect, if deeply unhealthy sense. So FSP and FNE are the internal drivers, but they get amplified by the social environment itself. The whole platform seems engineered to turn casual scrolling into this constant addictive comparison machine.
Yes, and that brings us to social comparison. Humans have always compared themselves to each other. It's natural. But social media just amplifies this behavior exponentially by only showing you the highlights reel. You're perpetually exposed to what's called amplified upward social comparison, constantly comparing yourself to others who seem vastly superior, but based entirely on their meticulously curated, unrealistic content.
Okay, and this is where the psychology gets really paradoxical. Because you would think, logically, that constantly comparing your real life to the filtered perfection of hundreds of other people would just destroy your self-worth. It should make you feel worse.
That's the classic logical trap. But the data showed a really surprising finding. Social comparison actually significantly boosted self-esteem while at the same time fueling excessive social media use. The two things moved up together.
Wait, hold on. If the comparison makes me feel better, why do I have to use the platform compulsively? Shouldn't I just be able to log off feeling great? This feels like the core confusion of the whole digital experience.
It implies that the self-esteem boost is, well, it's transient. It's highly conditional. The users are intensely seeking validation, and they get that temporary spike, that high, from the immediate engagement they get within the comparison cycle.
So they feel empowered for a minute.
For a minute, yes. But the feeling is unstable. They immediately become dependent on that cycle to maintain the feeling, which just drives up their usage.
It's like a cheap digital energy drink. You get this massive jolt of validation, the likes, the DMs, and you feel temporarily amazing, confirmed as that 8.5.
But the crash comes quickly.
And you need another dose almost immediately. So you never log off because the source of your self-worth is now completely external and it demands constant monitoring.
The boost is conditional on that continuous feedback. If they stop scrolling, the perceived value starts to deflate immediately, forcing them right back into that compulsive loop. And to really get what's driving the compulsion, it's vital to note one more finding. The underlying level of a person's self-esteem, whether it was high or low to begin with, was not a direct, significant predictor of their excessive social media use.
That is a crucial distinction. It really challenges the common idea that it's only people with low confidence who get addicted to social media validation.
Right. It means the excessive use is driven primarily by those external things, the fear of negative evaluation and the compulsion of the comparison cycle, not simply pre-existing issues with self-worth. The environment itself is so potently engineered that anyone, regardless of their foundational confidence, can be drawn into this dependency loop.
So the system creates the need.
Even if the person entering the system was initially psychologically robust. The platform changes the behavior and creates the anxiety, regardless of who you were when you started.
Now let's touch on one final psychological piece here,
Yeah.
the moderating role of gender, because that connects these internal anxieties back to, cultural expectations.
This is where we can bring in the lens of gender schema theory. It basically posits that culturally defined gender norms, the boxes society tells men and women to fit into, influence how we process information and experience social feedback online. And the research did confirm some key gender differences in how people respond to these pressures.
Specifically, how gender affects the emotional outcome of that relentless social comparison.
Yes. Gender significantly moderated the relationship between social comparison and self-esteem. The study found that women experienced a much stronger, more intense link between that constant comparison and the subsequent ups and downs in their self-esteem.
How do we interpret that? Why is the link more intense for women?
It suggests that the gendered expectations around appearance, conventional beauty standards, and getting approval, which are all heavily emphasized in very visual on social media, make women profoundly more vulnerable to the psychological effects of that upward comparison.
So they feel the need for validation more acutely.
More acutely, yes, because the standards they're comparing themselves against are often seen as central to their perceived social worth. It just hits closer to home.
That makes perfect sense. It explains the intense focus on aesthetic presentation you see in so many online female personas.
But, and this is a fascinating counterpoint, when it comes to the burden of the performance itself, gender did not moderate the link between false self-presentation, the FSP, and the resulting fear of negative evaluation, the F&E.
Meaning the anxiety of being exposed as a fraud is universal.
Exactly. Even if the content of the performance is different.
Right.
The psychological burden and the anxiety of maintaining an inauthentic digital identity are shared across genders. While the type of idealized content men might post, maybe focusing on success, provider ability, physical strength, differs from what women post, the internal pressure to uphold that image and the anxiety of failure is felt equally.
So the psychological cost of the performance is the same, even if the content of the performance is gendered.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've established this internal chaos of the fake currency market driven by anxiety and these fleeting highs. But to really test Sarah's claim that she can do better than a solid 7, we need to leave the digital world behind and look at the external mathematical structure that defines long-term value.
We have to move to the counterpoint. What happens when we view relationships through the lens of a mature, long-term economic market? How does value look when it's measured not by likes, but by, say, household production?
To really understand how detached digital value can be from reality, we have to go back to Gary S. Becker's seminal economic argument from, 1974.
That's the one.
He proposed that marriage isn't just a social thing, but a highly rational economic behavior. It's about scarce resources and maximizing utility.
This economic foundation treats the household as a productive unit, like a small factory designed to maximize its output. The core principle is that marriage is a kind of contract that only happens if, and only if, it increases the total utility, the overall well-being of both partners compared to them staying single.
It's an efficiency calculation.
Purely. And utility isn't just about salary or stuff you buy. It's measured by what Becker calls commodities, Z, that are produced within the household.
Okay, so Z. Let's make that concrete for a modern listener. What are these commodities we're producing at home?
Z could be the quality of your children, which means the successful investment of time and resources into their upbringing and education. It could be the emotional support and companionship you get from the relationship.
So not physical things.
Not always. It could be the utility you get from a perfectly kept garden or the shared experience of travel. These are things you can't just go out and buy in the market. They require specialized inputs from both partners.
So the real gain from marriage isn't just pooling your paychecks. It's about the synergistic value you create by combining your inputs, your time, your money, your skills, more efficiently than either of you could do alone.
That synergy is the definition of the gain. The primary gain comes from the compatibility or the complementarity of those inputs. Marriage is about maximizing the production of Z by allowing for specialization and a division of labor.
So if the total output of the marriage is greater than what both people could produce on their own, it's economically rational to get married.
And likely to happen, yes.
This leads us straight to assortive mating, or sorting. This is where we predict who mates with whom to maximize that total output. And this is where we find out if likes attract or opposites attract.
Well, it depends on the trade. Let's start with market wages, the money you earn from a job. For market wages, the optimal sorting is actually negative assortive mating.
Opposites attract.
Opposites attract. This means a low-wage partner ideally pairs with a high-wage partner.
Okay, that seems totally counterintuitive to the Sarah scenario, where she's convinced she needs the highest value partner in every single category. Why would the economic model favor opposites for income?
Because it maximizes the gains from the division of labor. The partner with the lower foregone value of their time, the low-wage partner, can specialize more in household production. They contribute their time input, their T, to Z.
And the high-wage partner specializes in market production.
Exactly. You're using the cheaper time of both members more effectively to produce those household commodities, which maximizes the joint output of Z.
But wait a minute. Are you saying two high-powered lawyers, both making a ton of money, can't marry without it being economically inefficient? That sounds incredibly transactional and cold.
Oh, they can absolutely marry. But they have to make a choice. They either sacrifice some of the Z that's produced through time, so they have less quality time or a less managed home, or one of them has to consciously pull back on their market specialization to focus more on household production.
So the greatest potential gain comes from a big difference in wages.
A big difference, yes, because the opportunity cost of their time is so different.
Okay, so opposites attract for wages, maximizing specialization. What about for non-market traits, things like education, intelligence, or even physical beauty?
Here, the rule completely flips. For non-human capital, like wealth, and for non-market productivity traits, education, intelligence, beauty, a positive correlation is optimal.
So, likes attract.
Likes attract.
Why the flip?
Because of the multiplicative effect. Non-market productivity and money income tend to combine multiplicatively, not additively. A higher value of a non-market trait has a bigger absolute effect on output when it's combined with a higher income.
Give me an example.
Sure. If a couple both share a trait like high intelligence, their joint ability to produce the commodity Z of, say, a high-quality, stimulating intellectual life together is compounded. It's more than just 1 plus 1. Therefore, traits that enhance commodity production should positively sort. Smart people marry smart people. Attractive people marry attractive people.
So that gives us the cold economic rationale guiding the stable long-term market. Specialization for wages, compounding for non-market traits.
Now we have to apply market equilibrium concepts. Specifically, how demographics, like the sex ratio, affect how that marital output gets divided up.
So Becker's model uses supply and demand to figure out the market equilibrium. And in a marriage market, that basically determines the price one spouse pays the other to secure the partnership.
Right. And if there's an imbalance in the number of marriageable men versus women, the scarcer gender can demand a higher share of the benefits, a higher share of that joint utility Z. It's the ultimate expression of supply and demand in relationships.
So how does that actually play out? Let's say if women are the scarcer resource.
A higher sex ratio, meaning more men relative to marriageable women, increases competition among the men. And since women are now the scarcer resource, they can secure a higher share of the marital income and consumption.
What does that look like in a household budget?
It translates into more spending on things that women tend to favor. Their own clothing, leisure travel, discretionary spending for the household. Essentially, the value of the partnership shifts disproportionately toward the woman's consumption.
And you shared a really compelling macroeconomic example of this, the competitive pressure in China.
Yes. The historically high male-to-female birth ratios in China, especially after the one-child policy, have been directly linked to a significant increase in household savings.
And that's interpreted as men engaging in a
powerful competitive savings motive. They're trying to increase their mate value in a high-competition environment.
They're basically being forced to pay a premium just to be considered competitive in the market.
They have to. They must acquire greater non-human capital, more savings, a better career signal, maybe securing a high-status apartment. They're optimizing their market signal because the structural pressure of scarcity demands it. It's really robust validation for the market theory.
This really shifts the analysis from the personal psychology of the digital world to these inescapable structural pressures. Which brings us to another way of modeling this, which reframes marriage as a market for work and household, or WIHO.
The WIHO approach is slightly different. It views spouses as separate agents, and their potential conflicts over things like who does the dishes or who manages the money are all mediated by these price mechanisms. We're looking at the price paid for specialized domestic services and time.
Okay, so in the WIHO model, if sex ratios are high, more men, how does that affect the wife's decision to work outside the home?
If sex ratios are high, that leads to a higher price, a better quasi-wage for female WIHO within the marriage. So for women who can earn a higher return for their time input inside the home, they are consequently less likely to participate in the external labor force.
The market inside the home becomes more lucrative.
More lucrative and more attractive relative to the market outside the home.
So women's career paths are actually being structurally determined by the sex ratio of the community they live in.
Precisely. And we see clear data on this. Cohorts of young women in the U.S. who faced historically low sex ratios, like the early baby boomers, they experience historically rapid growth in labor force participation.
Which fits the theory.
Perfectly. When the price of wives, or female WIHO, is low because there's a surplus of women, women seek economic value in the external labor market because the quasi-wage at home is just less competitive.
And this model also sees commitment itself as part of the price.
It is. That's utility maximization at work. Higher sex ratios predict that men will be more willing to offer commitment, which leads to more marriage and less cohabitation for women. Commitment serves as an added non-monetary premium offered to secure the female's WIHO and companionship.
Okay, so finally, let's go back to the idea of that solid 7 in our opening story. What if that guy is, say, older or less educated, a less desirable employer of WIHO? How does the market compensate for that?
This is the concept of compensating differentials, and it's taken straight from traditional labor economics. Less desirable employers of WIHO, men who are older, less educated, maybe less attractive, they have to pay a premium to their spouses for their WIHO input.
And what does that premium look like in the real world? It's not just cash, right?
No, it's a whole package of benefits designed to offset the undesirable characteristic. For example, an older, less educated man might compensate his spouse with higher consumption, more luxury travel, better housing, more financial independence for her.
Or it could be non-monetary.
It could be. He might offer significantly greater commitment and stability, or take on more household maintenance tasks himself, or provide a higher degree of emotional security. This mechanism ensures that even undesirable traits can be offset by a high enough price, which allows the market to reach an equilibrium.
So the economic framework gives us this robust, objective, and somewhat brutal definition of long-term value. It's based on complementarity, specialized labor, market scarcity, a stable system built on utility.
But as we saw, many people are operating in a totally parallel market, one driven by raw, unverified data and highly selective curation.
And that parallel market is where academic concepts often lose all their nuance and just become rhetorical tools in these ideological battles.
Exactly.
Okay, this final section is so critical for understanding the deep frustration and conflict we see online. We have to analyze how concepts that are rooted in academic evolutionary psychology, or EP, get taken, stripped down, and often radicalized in these online communities. Let's start with hypergamy.
Right. So academically, hypergamy is a sociological term. Generally just refers to mating with a partner of higher status or wealth. It's a statistical observation.
Pretty neutral.
Pretty neutral. But the online interpretation, especially in manosphere communities, takes this idea to a complete extreme. It's framed as this absolute, uncompromising biological law.
And what is the online assertion of hypergamy? What does it mean there?
The assertion is that women possess an evolutionary imperative that demands they will only be truly satisfied in a long-term relationship if the mate is superior to them in every single dimension.
Every single one.
Intellectual, financial, emotional, physical. They assert that if a man is inferior in even one category, his other traits have to compensate overwhelmingly, or else the woman will be unfulfilled and will inevitably seek a superior mate.
This kind of claim often relies on these really specific and controversial metrics to try and quantify this. This is where we get the quintuple six.
The quintuple six, yes. This is asserted as the bare minimum standard for men to even stand out in the current dating market. And it's defined very specifically. 6 feet tall, earning 6 figures, having the six-pack, a 6 out of 10 face at a minimum, and often a 6-inch member.
And the rationale for this metric is always presented as this kind of inescapable mathematical conclusion, isn't it?
Always. The claim is that if you assume these highly desirable traits are independent, normally distributed factors, height, income, attractiveness, then for a woman to find a man who is, say, one standard deviation above the mean in each of those factors, well, statistically, that means only the top 0.3% of men would ever be a satisfactory long-term match for the average woman.
The top 0.3%. That is an incredibly extreme conclusion to draw from a set of cherry-picked, non-independent factors.
It's a profound manipulation of statistics, but the psychological impact of that number is powerful. The conclusion they draw is that, given this impossibly extreme standard, it's no wonder that dating is a mess. It justifies their fatalistic view that the market is just inherently rigged against 99.7% of men.
This discourse also brings in another distinction between types of value, sexual market value, SMV, versus relationship market value, RMV.
This distinction is used to explain the perceived struggle of attractive women to find committed, high-quality, long-term partners. The claim is that a woman's SMV, her value for short-term, casual sex, is significantly higher than her RMV, her long-term value for commitment.
And why do they claim this distinction exists? What's the problem it supposedly causes for attractive women?
The theory is that peak attractiveness is short-lived, leading to a rapid decline in her RMV after a certain age. So the result is that attractive women get flooded with casual dating offers, but struggle to get commitment from the men they actually want.
Because those men are calculating her a long-term utility.
Right. They're calculating her RMV and finding it insufficient for that level of long-term commitment. The SMV gets the attention, the RMV determines the commitment.
Okay, so moving beyond hypergamy, maybe the most core scientific concept that gets co-opted is the dual mating strategy hypothesis.
Yes. The academic hypothesis suggests an evolutionary strategy where women secured stable provider mates, the so-called betas, for resources and stability, while simultaneously seeking high-quality genes from more attractive, dominant affair partners, the alphas.
And this was seen academically as a complex, unconscious strategy to maximize reproductive fitness in our ancestral past.
Unconscious is the key word.
Right.
But the online interpretation strips away all of that nuance. It reduces a complex scientific model to a simple antagonistic soundbite.
Which is?
Alpha fucks, beta bucks.
Right.
Online communities, especially those like the Red Pill and MGTOW, they reduce the entire concept to that. They cite it as proof that female fidelity is a fairy tale. It's described not as a complex, unconscious drive, but as a deliberate, manipulative strategy that women consciously use today.
This is the critical point, right? Where the scientific authority gets distorted through language and conflation.
It is. It's the danger of confusing two totally distinct levels of strategy. On one hand, you have ultimate evolutionary strategy, the deep, unconscious programming coded over millennia to maximize fitness, the why of a behavior. On the other hand, you have proximate conscious behavior, the conscious choices a person makes today, the how.
So ultimate strategy is the code running in the background, but proximate behavior is the app you decide to open on a Tuesday. And these online communities are saying the background code is the only thing that matters, and it's a conscious choice.
That's the linguistic conflation. They map the objective, amoral, antagonistic Darwinian framework directly onto modern gender politics. It lets them just dismiss complex human behavior as simple manipulative biology.
And that lets them characterize entire social movements as just biological imperatives. It's a powerful rhetorical trick.
It is. In this rhetoric, feminism, for example, is explicitly described not as a social or political movement, but as a sexual strategy used by women to maximize their ability to select mates, switch mates, and get the most resources they can.
By using the scientific-sounding term sexual strategy, they reframe the whole movement as a conscious reproductive agenda against men, which robs it of any political or intellectual legitimacy in their view.
And this framework provides the pseudoscientific foundation, for the black pill ideology, which is often associated with incel communities.
And the black pill is this fatalistic worldview, right? That genetics and immutable traits determine all dating success. They cite reputable scientific research to support their claims of absolute undeniability.
They use scientific authority as a shield. By invoking research papers, they claim that female mate selection is just a synonym for their own personal rejection, and that any attempt to change this is futile because it's biological law.
And they ignore the hypothetical or conjectural nature of these theories.
Completely. They treat correlations as absolute, undeniable laws of human nature.
Which leads to this intense emotional and very moral reaction to what are supposed to be objective scientific findings.
This is maybe the most striking contrast. Evolutionary research, at its core, is amoral. It just tries to explain mechanisms without passing judgment. But the online response is just intense moral outrage. For instance, female sexual agency, sexual liberation, it's often viewed very negatively, not as freedom, but as disruption.
They see it as a loss of stability.
Exactly. The finding that women might have evolutionary adaptations for short-term mating isn't accepted objectively. It causes profound emotional distress. It translates directly into moral condemnation. Some will claim women's sexual freedom was opening Pandora's box because of their alleged biologically hardwired desires to cheat. The amoral fact is met with moral outrage.
And finally, we have to talk about the pervasive sexual double standard that runs through this entire discourse, even when it's claiming to be objective and scientific.
The bias is profound, and it's selective. While the research on female short-term mating is studied, condemned, and used as rhetorical proofs of deceit, the extensive evolutionary underpinnings of male sexuality, their own propensity for short-term mating, are just entirely omitted or ignored.
So evolutionary explanations are applied exclusively to pathologize female behavior.
It serves the ideology. If women's tendencies for extra-pair mating make them brainless primates or absolute scum, the question of whether men should also be labeled with those terms for their own evolutionary legacies, that's just not a line of reasoning you find in these communities.
The science is used as a highly selective mirror,
reflecting only the behaviors that justify the sense of grievance and rejection that the ideological participants feel. It upholds the sexual double standard even while it's claiming scientific authority.
It's a clear demonstration of ideology dictating the interpretation rather than the science driving the ideology. So we started with Sarah, scrolling through her curated digital reality, equating a stream of likes and DMs with a concrete market report confirming her high value and 8.5. We then dove deep into those internal psychological mechanisms, FSP, FNE, the addiction of comparison, that make that fleeting digital validation both addictive and so anxiety-inducing.
Then we moved from that psychological noise to the cold, structural logic of economics. We examined Becker's model of marriage as utility maximization, where value comes from complementary specialization and compounding non-market traits, all governed by competitive forces like the sex ratio.
And finally, we explored that ideological battleground where complex evolutionary concepts are simplified into these rigid, fatalistic dogmas, which just creates immense psychological pressure.
The essential through line that connects all three of these parts, the personal anxiety, the economic structure, and the ideological conflict, is the concept of value and the disastrous consequences of confusing different currencies, the emotional distress, the excessive engagement, the adoption of extreme ideologies. It all seems to stem from mistaking the highly volatile short-term value of digital attention for the stable, specialized value required for long-term connection.
We've really established two starkly different definitions of value today.
We have. First, there's the fake value. That's the currency derived from false self-presentation and the fear of negative evaluation. This value is transient, it's driven by social comparison, and it leads to an inflated self-perception and these unrealistic expectations. Mm-hmm. It's consumption pretending to be production.
A system that requires constant emotional monitoring just to manage the anxiety.
Exactly.
And second, the real value.
The real value.
Yeah.
This is the currency derived from complementarity, from specialized household production, and from competitive market dynamics, like in the economic models. This value is rooted in maximizing total utility, that Z. It often requires specialization, negative assortive mating for wages, and compounding non-market assets like intelligence or wealth.
This value is stable, functional.
And it's proven out by macroeconomic effects, like competitive savings. It's real.
So the ultimate synthesis of our deep dive is this. The emotional conflict and confusion you see in modern dating seems to stem from a fundamental inability to distinguish between these two currencies. People are mistaking transient, fear-driven digital validation, which is all about performance and perception, for lasting market value, which is about specialized complementary exchange. The challenge for you is to recognize whether your perception of your own worth and the worth of a potential partner is being dictated by the unstable, anxiety-driven digital currency or the specialized, long-term currency of utility and commitment.